Welcome to the next episode of a CPFT video series for coping with worry, anxiety and depression. This is episode 3, Managing Anxiety, part 5, Using Thought Records. My name's Laura Bratt and I'm a CBT therapist with the Peterborough team in the Psychological Wellbeing Service for CPFT. In earlier videos, we saw how to use a worry tree. However, sometimes we might need to explore our worries a little bit further. It can be helpful to break down and look at the thoughts more closely to help decide if the worries are actually accurate. Much like the advice we get to catch it, bin it, kill it for the coronavirus or the flu, we may need to catch our thoughts, check our thoughts, and change our thoughts, or catch it, check it, change it. It is helpful to break down the thoughts to identify what it is we are worrying about and whether there is objective evidence to support our worries. You can also ask yourself if you are making any thinking errors, which we will explore later in this video, in order to help develop a thought which is more balanced, compassionate and helpful. A thought record can be a helpful way of doing this. A thought record is broken down into 6 columns. In the first column, we identify the situation. To do this, you can ask yourself a number of questions. For example, where was I? What was I doing? Or what else was happening at the time? The next column is to note down the most obvious or strong emotions that you experienced while in that situation. Once we have identified the situation and emotion, the third column is to note down your specific thoughts going through your mind, which you think played a role in causing those emotions. With the first 3 columns identified, we now explore and gather evidence for this thought. To do this, it's helpful to ask yourself certain questions. Would this evidence stand up in a court of law? Would an objective person think the same thing as me in this situation? Or has this happened to me before? The next column is for your evidence against your thought. This would generally highlight if your current way of thinking is not accurate or helpful. For example, you can ask yourself, is there any evidence contradicting this way of thinking which I may have overlooked? Or, how does this thinking help me achieve my goals? Or, is there an alternative perspective that might bring about a better result for me? Once you have collected up all your evidence, for and against, you use this to swap the worrisome thought with something that is more helpful, valid and accurate. This might begin with, it's understandable that I'm thinking this way, but not all the facts support this, so I need to remind myself that there's an alternative way of thinking about this. Let's run through an example to bring this to life. So a situation might be, my child won't go to sleep and keeps getting up out of bed, and I'm trying to finish my work, but it's already 10 o'clock at night. The most common emotions that we might pop in the next column are frustration and worry with this. You might be thinking, I'm not going to get my work done, and I'm a terrible parent because I can't get my children into a good bedtime routine. The next column is to collect up your evidence for this thought, which supports how you're thinking. So examples of this might be, my children are out of bed, my work still isn't done, and I read a Mumsnet article that said bedtime is very important for young children, and I'm letting them down if I don't implement a good bedtime routine. In the next column, we'll gather all our evidence that contradicts the worrisome thought. For example, I've always completed all my work on time, no matter how late my children have gone to bed. And actually, lots of people have commented on how well behaved my children are. And the health visitor commented that I was doing a really good job with them as well. The next stage is to look at all the evidence for and against and decide if it is reliable. In the two columns containing information about our thoughts, it is true that the children are still up and work is not yet complete. However, we might question how reliable a source of information Mumsnet is. Once we've checked out how reliable our evidence is, we can then also ask ourselves if we are making any thinking errors. For example, we thought we were a terrible parent because our children wouldn't stay in bed. However, we can see from the evidence that we are overgeneralising because we've ignored the other evidence, such as the positive comment from the health visitor. We also experience worry that we wouldn't be able to complete our work. However, this was us catastrophising, where we're imagining the worst outcome, even though we have always managed to complete our work on time. Going back to our thought record, the final thing we now need to do is to create a more realistic, compassionate, and helpful thought based on this evidence. For example, it is understandable that I am frustrated and worried. However, I know I am a good enough parent because my health visitor had no concerns and my children are well behaved most of the time. A couple of nights where they don't have a strong bedtime routine does not mean that I'm a terrible parent. And I know I generally complete my work on time and I finish my projects before the deadlines without any complaints. Now that we have explored using thought records and run through an example, why don't you test this out with a couple of your own thoughts and then come back and re-watch the video. Finally, I just want to mention a few other strategies for coping with unhelpful thoughts. These are distraction, diffusion, and mindfulness, and will be explored in the next 3 videos. Thank you for listening. I would like to thank the other staff who have been involved in the development of this video series, from the Psychological Wellbeing Service and the Peterborough Exemplar Project for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough NHS Foundation Trust. Do subscribe to the CPFT YouTube channel to receive alerts when further videos are uploaded, and check out our website for more information at www.cpft.nhs.uk.